Imagine a queen, one of history's most powerful, standing resolute amidst the swirling tides of conspiracy and expectation. She commanded empires, captivated courtiers, and defied every norm of her time. Yet on the eve of her death, she refused to lie down, whispering to her startled ladies, "If you knew what I saw in my bed, you would not ask me to lie there." What secret horror haunted England's virgin queen, Elizabeth I, even in her final hours? What profound, unspoken truth forced her to choose a life of solitude over love, power over partnership, and a legacy forged in iron, yet shadowed by an enduring mystery? Tonight, we dive deep into the heart of a queen's guarded life, peeling back centuries of speculation to uncover the hidden illness, the crushing traumas, and the strategic brilliance that shaped one of history's most enigmatic figures. This isn't just a story of a queen, it's a chilling exploration of what it truly meant to be Elizabeth, alone on the throne. Before we unravel these secrets, take a moment to hit that like button if you're ready to explore the depths of history's most compelling mysteries. And if you want to stay with us on this journey through forgotten pasts and untold stories, subscribe to the channel and join our community of history enthusiasts. Your support helps us bring these incredible narratives to life. Now, let's step back into the dimly lit corridors of the 16th century, where a young princess's fate was sealed by betrayal, and a kingdom's future hinged on her unprecedented choice. Elizabeth's story, a saga often romanticized, began not with glory, but with the brutal reality of a child orphaned by decree. Born in 1533, she was initially hailed as a beacon of hope, a testament to her father, King Henry VIII's desperate quest for a male heir. Yet within 3 short years, the same decree that declared her legitimacy snatched it away, branding her a bastard, removing her from the line of succession, and, most devastatingly, condemning her mother, Anne Boleyn, to a gruesome execution. Can you imagine the trauma of a 3-year-old girl growing up in a court where the very memory of her mother was erased, whispered about as a traitor and a witch? This wasn't just a loss, it was an existential void, a constant reminder that love, particularly the love of a king, could be a fleeting, dangerous illusion. Her childhood was not one of idyllic royal privilege, but a precarious dance on the edge of legitimacy, always under the watchful, often suspicious eyes of her father and his subsequent wives. Each new stepmother brought a fresh wave of anxiety, a new set of rules, and a constant threat to her very existence. The Tudors were a ruthless family defined by their pursuit of power, and Elizabeth, from her earliest days, learned that survival demanded an impenetrable exterior. She witnessed firsthand the swift and brutal consequences of displeasing the monarch, observing the political machinations that consumed those around her. This formative period instilled in her an acute understanding of power dynamics, a cynicism towards affection, and a profound self-reliance that would define her reign. She was a keen observer, absorbing lessons from every turn of the court, every fall from grace, and every rise to power. The lesson etched deepest into her young mind was that vulnerability was a fatal flaw, and emotional attachment a dangerous weakness. As she blossomed into a sharp-witted young woman, she navigated the treacherous waters of her half-siblings' reigns. Under her half-brother Edward VI, she found a brief respite, a glimpse of intellectual companionship. But it was under the reign of her Catholic half-sister, Mary I, that Elizabeth truly understood the peril of her position. A Protestant princess in a fiercely Catholic court, Elizabeth became a symbol of hope for a persecuted populace. This made her an immediate threat to Mary, who, consumed by her own religious fervor and a desperate desire for an heir, saw her half-sister as a rival to be neutralized. Elizabeth was imprisoned in the Tower of London, a place where many of her family members had met their end, including her mother. Imagine the sheer terror of that experience, the cold stone walls, the ever-present threat of execution, the psychological torment of not knowing whether each sunrise would be her last. It was in these dark confines that Elizabeth honed her extraordinary mental fortitude. She learned to control her emotions, to speak in riddles, to appease her captors while silently maintaining her inner resolve. She understood the art of patience, the power of quiet observation, and the supreme importance of never revealing her true intentions. This period forged the steel in her character, transforming a vulnerable princess into a strategic mastermind. She emerged from the tower not broken, but hardened, more determined than ever to control her own destiny and ensure such powerlessness would never be her fate again. The experience solidified her understanding that survival often meant standing alone, relying solely on her own intellect and unwavering will. When Mary I died childless in 1558, Elizabeth, against all odds, ascended to the throne. The moment was electrifying, fraught with both hope and trepidation. England was a divided nation, reeling from religious strife, economic instability, and the recent loss of Calais, a symbol of English pride. The young queen, barely 25, was immediately faced with immense pressure. She was a woman in a man's world, expected by many to marry and produce an heir, to conform to the traditional role of a queen consort rather than a ruling monarch. But Elizabeth had other plans. She had seen what marriage did to women in power, how it often diminished their authority, subjecting them to the will of their husbands. She famously declared, "I will have but one mistress here, and no master." This was not just a political statement, it was a deeply personal one, rooted in the traumatic experiences of her youth. Her father's multiple marriages, her mother's execution, her stepmother's precarious positions, all these lessons had imprinted upon her the inherent dangers of marital bonds for a woman in her position. She understood that a husband, no matter how beloved, would inevitably bring his own agenda, his own foreign alliances, and his own claims to power, potentially undermining her authority and the stability of her realm. The prospect of sharing her throne, of yielding any part of her hard-won sovereignty, was simply unthinkable. Yet the pressure to marry was relentless. Courtiers, parliament, and foreign powers alike clamored for her to secure the succession, to produce an heir and cement the Tudor dynasty. Suitors from every corner of Europe vied for her hand. The Archduke Charles of Austria, Prince Eric XIV of Sweden, even King Philip II of Spain, her former brother-in-law. Each proposal was a political chess move, an opportunity to forge alliances or neutralize threats. Elizabeth, with unparalleled skill, played them all. She entertained, she flirted, she deliberated, but she never committed. She used her unmarried status as a powerful diplomatic tool, keeping potential allies guessing and potential enemies at bay. Her virginity became a symbol of her devotion to England, her body politic married to the state, not to a man. This clever manipulation of her marital status was a testament to her political genius, a masterclass in delaying tactics and strategic ambiguity. She understood that once she married, that powerful bargaining chip would be gone, and her independence severely compromised. Her court became a stage, and she, the ultimate performer, orchestrating elaborate dances of courtship that never reached the altar. This constant performance, however, extracted a heavy toll. It required her to maintain an emotional distance, to guard her true feelings, and to live a life perpetually under scrutiny, devoid of the simple comforts and companionship that most women of her era took for granted. The Virgin Queen was a title she embraced, but it also masked a profound personal sacrifice.
Among her many suitors and closest confidants, one figure stood out: Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Their connection was undeniable, a passionate, volatile bond that simmered beneath the surface of courtly decorum for decades. They had known each other since childhood, sharing a history, a familiarity that no other could claim. Whispers of their affair permeated the court, fueling both hope and scandal. Dudley was handsome, ambitious, and utterly devoted to Elizabeth. Many believed he was the only man she truly loved. Imagine the internal conflict: the Queen, burdened by duty, yearning for the personal connection she so meticulously denied herself. Their relationship was a tightrope walk between deep affection and political impossibility. Dudley was already married, and the mysterious death of his wife, Amy Robsart, only intensified the scandal, making marriage to the Queen an untenable prospect. The political fallout would have been catastrophic, leading to accusations of murder, weakening her authority, and potentially sparking civil unrest. Elizabeth, ever the pragmatist, understood the price of such a union. She chose the stability of her realm over the dictates of her heart, a decision that must have caused immense personal anguish. Their bond, though never formalized, remained a constant in her life, a testament to the powerful human need for connection, even for a queen sworn to solitude. Their exchanges, often filled with coded language and unspoken desires, reveal a side of Elizabeth rarely seen by the public, a woman capable of deep affection, yet perpetually constrained by the demands of her crown. The tragedy of their relationship was that they were perfectly matched in spirit, but utterly mismatched in circumstance. Beyond the political maneuvers and the tragic romance with Robert Dudley, a darker, more whispered-about theory began to circulate through the corridors of power, a theory that Elizabeth's refusal to marry wasn't just a strategic choice, but a physical necessity. For centuries, historians and medical experts have pored over the records of her life, searching for clues about a hidden illness that she might have taken to her grave. It is documented that Elizabeth suffered from various mysterious ailments throughout her reign. She was plagued by violent headaches, debilitating fainting spells, and what her doctors called melancholy. But there were more specific, more alarming reports. The Spanish ambassador, a man whose job was to pry into every royal secret, wrote home with shocking claims that the Queen suffered from a physical malady that made her incapable of bearing children. Some modern medical researchers have gone even further, speculating that Elizabeth may have had a condition known as androgen insensitivity syndrome, which would have meant she appeared outwardly as a woman but was biologically unable to conceive. Imagine the crushing weight of such a secret in an era where a queen's primary duty was to provide an heir. If she truly possessed a physical defect in the eyes of the 16th century, it would have been more than a medical issue. It would have been a catastrophic political weakness. To reveal such a thing would be to invite her enemies to claim she was unnatural or cursed, potentially delegitimizing her entire reign. This would explain her intense, almost pathological need for privacy. She famously refused to allow her doctors to examine her body fully, and her ladies-in-waiting were sworn to the utmost secrecy, forming a protective barrier between the Queen's private reality and the public's expectations. Every time she danced with vigor at a court ball or went hunting in the forests, she was performing a masterpiece of misdirection, proving to the world that she was healthy, vibrant, and capable, while perhaps hiding a truth that kept her awake at night. As the years turned into decades, this performance of perfection became more elaborate and more exhausting. Elizabeth was acutely aware that her beauty was a political tool. As she aged, she crafted the image of Gloriana, an eternal, ageless goddess of the moon. This is where the famous white lead makeup comes into play. She began to apply a thick paste called Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar, to her face, neck, and hands. To the public, it gave her a ghostly porcelain brilliance that symbolized purity, but in reality, it was a slow-acting poison. The lead seeped into her skin, causing it to gray and wrinkle prematurely, which in turn forced her to apply even thicker layers of the toxic paste. It was a vicious cycle of vanity and survival. Underneath the wigs of vibrant red hair and the stiff jewel-encrusted gowns that weighed 60 pounds, the real Elizabeth was fading. Her teeth grew black from her love of sugar, a luxury of the rich, and she often used pieces of cloth to fill out her cheeks so she wouldn't look gaunt. Yet she never let the mask slip. If you find this dedication to power as haunting as I do, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to keep digging into these hidden layers of history that the textbooks often gloss over. We are just getting into the most intense part of her journey, and I want you there with us as we witness the final, lonely days of the Tudor dynasty. By the 1590s, the world around Elizabeth was changing. Her old advisors, the men who had guided her since her youth, were dying off. Robert Dudley was gone, leaving a void in her heart that no one could truly fill. She found herself surrounded by a new generation of ambitious young men, like the Earl of Essex, who did not remember the dangers of the past and viewed the aging queen as an obstacle to their own power. Essex, once a favorite, eventually led a failed rebellion against her. Though she loved him, she didn't hesitate to sign his death warrant. It was a final, brutal reminder that to Elizabeth, the crown always came first. But the toll of these executions and losses was visible. She became increasingly paranoid and withdrawn. She moved from palace to palace, never staying in one place too long, as if trying to outrun death itself. Her insomnia became legendary. She feared sleep because in sleep she had no control. She feared the dreams of her mother, of the people she had sent to the block, and perhaps the fear of what would happen to England once she was gone.
This brings us back to those final, chilling hours in Richmond Palace in March 1603. The Queen had fallen into a deep, silent despair following the death of her close friend, the Countess of Nottingham. She refused all medicine and, most famously, refused to go to bed. For days, she sat on cushions on the floor, staring at the ground, her finger in her mouth, a haunting image of a woman who had conquered the world but could not conquer her own mind. When the courtiers finally forced her into bed, she knew the end was near. She had spent 44 years holding a kingdom together through sheer force of will, playing a role that required her to be more than human. As the breath left her body in the early hours of March 24th, the Virgin Queen left behind a nation that was transformed, yet a personal life that remained an impenetrable fortress. She died as she had lived, shrouded in mystery, protected by her own legends, and ultimately, profoundly alone. She had traded the warmth of a family and the comfort of a partner for the cold immortality of history. In the end, Elizabeth I didn't just rule England, she became England. Her story is a testament to the fact that power always has a price, and for the woman who chose to be the Virgin Queen, that price was a loneliness that echoed through the centuries. To understand the true scale of Elizabeth's sacrifice, we must look deeper into the rivals who haunted her dreams, specifically the woman who was her polar opposite, Mary, Queen of Scots. While Elizabeth was the master of restraint, Mary was a creature of impulse and passion. Mary's arrival in England, fleeing her own rebellious subjects, placed Elizabeth in an impossible position. For 19 years, Mary was Elizabeth's guest, but in reality, she was a prisoner in a gilded cage. Every plot to assassinate Elizabeth, every Catholic uprising, every Spanish intrigue had Mary's name at its center. Elizabeth agonized over what to do with her cousin. To kill a fellow anointed queen was to set a dangerous precedent. It was an admission that a monarch's life was not sacred. Yet to let her live was to keep a ticking bomb at the heart of her kingdom.
When Elizabeth finally signed Mary's death warrant in 1587, she did so with such reluctance that she later tried to blame her secretaries for the execution. The ghost of Mary Stuart, much like the ghost of Anne Boleyn, became another layer of the guilt Elizabeth carried under those heavy embroidered robes. If you're captivated by this high-stakes game of queens, make sure to like this video and subscribe. We're about to explore the moment Elizabeth faced her greatest external threat, an event that would define her as the warrior queen and cement her legend forever. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, gave King Philip II of Spain the excuse he had been waiting for. In 1588, he launched the Spanish Armada, the Invincible Fleet. This was the ultimate test of Elizabeth's reign. As the massive Spanish galleons approached the English coast, Elizabeth did something that no one expected. She rowed out to Tilbury to face her troops. She didn't stay safely tucked away in a palace. She appeared before her army wearing a silver breastplate over a white velvet dress. This was the moment she gave the most famous speech in English history. She told her soldiers, "I know I have the body but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England, too." At that moment, she wasn't a virgin or a victim of her past. She was the embodiment of a nation's soul. When the English fire ships and a providential storm, the Protestant wind, shattered the Armada, Elizabeth's status rose from a mere queen to a near-mythical figure. The victory was seen as divine intervention, a sign that God himself favored the Virgin Queen.
But victory on the battlefield didn't translate to peace in the palace. The later years of her reign, often called the nasty 90s, were marked by famine, economic depression, and the rising cost of war. The adoration of her subjects began to sour. This is when the loneliness of the throne became a physical weight. She was surrounded by men who were younger than her own grandchildren, men who saw her as a relic of a bygone era. She became increasingly obsessed with her image because it was the only thing she had left to control. She ordered that no artist could paint her portrait unless it followed a specific pattern that made her look forever young. This was the mask of youth. It was a propaganda campaign designed to hide the fact that the Tudor line was ending with her. She had no heir, and the question of who would take her crown was the one subject she forbade anyone to mention under penalty of treason. Think about the psychological toll of that silence. Every day she looked in the mirror and saw the aging woman, but every day she walked out into the court and had to pretend she was an immortal goddess. The stress manifested in strange ways. She would have sudden bursts of temper, throwing shoes at her advisors or swearing like a sailor. She would dance the galliard, a physically demanding dance, even in her late 60s, just to prove to foreign ambassadors that she wasn't dying. It was a desperate, heroic, and tragic struggle against time. She had spent her whole life proving she was enough, that she didn't need a man or a child to be complete. And now, as the end approached, she was facing the reality that her name would die with her. To truly understand how Elizabeth survived 4 decades of constant threats, we have to look into the shadows of her court, where the first modern intelligence agency was born. Elizabeth was a queen who trusted no one, and for good reason. Her master of spies, Sir Francis Walsingham, created a massive web of informants that stretched from the back alleys of London to the royal courts of Europe. This atmosphere of constant surveillance meant that Elizabeth lived in a world of whispers. She knew that every letter she wrote could be intercepted, and every word she spoke could be twisted. This constant state of high alert is likely what contributed to her chronic insomnia and her watery humors. She lived her life like a chess player, always thinking 10 moves ahead, never allowing herself the luxury of a spontaneous emotion. Imagine the mental exhaustion of never being able to turn off that protective shield. It's no wonder she suffered from what we would today call severe anxiety and paranoia.
She was a woman who had to be a genius just to stay alive, and that kind of pressure changes a person's soul. If you're finding this deep dive into the mind of a queen fascinating, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We're exploring the parts of history that were never meant to be told, and your support helps us keep the fire of discovery burning. Stay with us as we look at the secret intellectual life that Elizabeth used as her final sanctuary. When the world became too loud and the politics too treacherous, Elizabeth retreated into the world of the mind. She was perhaps the most educated woman of her era. She spoke 6 languages fluently and could translate complex philosophical texts from Latin and Greek into English just for relaxation. This was her secret weapon. When foreign ambassadors tried to bully her or use flowery language to hide their intentions, she would answer them back in their own tongue with a sharp, intellectual wit that left them speechless. She used her intelligence to level the playing field. In a time when women were seen as intellectually inferior, Elizabeth was often the smartest person in any room. This intellectual superiority was another form of illness in the eyes of the men around her. A woman who thought like a man was seen as a threat to the natural order. But for Elizabeth, her books were her only true friends. They didn't ask for favors, they didn't plot to take her throne, and they didn't judge her for her choices.
However, as she entered her final decade, even her books couldn't distract her from the physical decline. Her use of the lead-based makeup began to cause more than just skin issues. It likely led to lead poisoning, which causes irritability, memory loss, and depression. The very thing she used to maintain her image was destroying her brain. During her final golden speech to Parliament in 1601, she admitted that her body was failing, but her heart remained dedicated to her people. She said, "Though God hath raised me high, yet this I count the glory of my crown, that I have reigned with your loves." It was a rare moment of vulnerability, a public admission that the mask was finally slipping. She was preparing her people for the end of an era. The final days at Richmond Palace were not just a medical crisis, but a spiritual one. Elizabeth's refusal to lie down was rooted in a deep superstitious fear. She had seen so many people in her life go to their beds and never wake up. To her, the bed was a place of surrender, and Elizabeth Tudor never surrendered. She stood until her legs swelled, until her breath became labored, and until she could no longer speak. When she finally allowed her ladies to help her onto the cushions, she was a shadow of the woman who had defied the Spanish Armada. The hidden illness that had shaped her destiny, whether it was a physical malady, a psychological trauma, or the toxic effects of her own vanity, had finally won. When she died, the crown was passed to James VI of Scotland, the son of the very woman Elizabeth had executed. It was a final, bitter irony of history. The Virgin Queen had protected England, but she could not protect her own bloodline. She died the last of the Tudors, taking her secrets, her paint, and her lonely heart into the silence of Westminster Abbey. To truly understand the legacy of the woman who would be king, we must look at the court she created, a glittering, dangerous theater where every word was a performance and every gesture a gamble. The Elizabethan court was not just a seat of government, it was a cult of personality centered entirely on the queen's body. Elizabeth demanded that her courtiers treat her as a romantic ideal, a fairy queen who was the source of all beauty and light. This created a bizarre atmosphere where elderly advisors had to write love poems to a woman in her 60s just to keep their jobs. While it seems vain on the surface, this was a brilliant political maneuver. By forcing the men of England to compete for her love, she prevented them from competing for her power. She turned her potential rivals into her suitors, keeping them in a state of perpetual adolescence where they were too busy fighting each other for her favor to ever unite against her. But imagine the emotional vacuum this created for Elizabeth herself. To be everyone's son meant she could never be anyone's equal.
She was surrounded by thousands of people, yet she lived in an isolation so profound it is hard to fathom. She was the most famous woman in the world, yet no one had touched her as a human being in decades. If this exploration of the high price of power is moving you, please hit the like button and subscribe to stay with us. We are now entering the final, most analytical phase of our journey, where we look at the common people of England and how they perceived the woman they called Good Queen Bess, and how modern science finally interprets the mystery of her hidden life.
Beyond the palace walls, the common people of England lived in a different reality. To them, Elizabeth was more than a person, she was a miracle. They had lived through the chaos of her father's many wives, the religious executions under Bloody Mary, and the constant threat of civil war. Under Elizabeth, for the first time in generations, there was a sense of England as a unified identity. The people didn't see the lead paint or the rotting teeth. They saw the woman who had brought peace. They celebrated her accession day with more fervor than Christmas. This public adoration was Elizabeth's only true source of comfort. She would often stop her royal processions to speak to a poor person in the crowd or to accept a small gift of flowers from a commoner. These were the only moments where the mask of Gloriana felt real. She understood that while the nobles served her out of ambition, the people loved her out of hope. This bond with the common folk was her true marriage, and she guarded it fiercely. Yet, even this bond was tested by the hidden illness that modern medicine now seeks to diagnose. Some historians point to her symptoms, the chronic fatigue, the sudden fainting, and the skin lesions, as evidence of something much more common, yet equally tragic for a queen. A thyroid disorder, or even a chronic autoimmune condition like lupus. In the 16th century, these would have been seen as signs of being unfit or cursed. Elizabeth would have had to hide the tremors in her hands by gripping her scepter tighter. She would have had to hide her exhaustion by standing for hours, proving her strength through sheer agony. This adds a layer of heroism to her story that is often overlooked. She wasn't just a queen who didn't want to marry. She was a woman fighting a daily war against a body that was failing her, all while maintaining the illusion of divine perfection. As we look back from the year 2025, we see Elizabeth not just as a historical figure, but as a warning. She is the ultimate example of what happens when a person is consumed by their public image. She spent so much time building a legend that there was no room left for a life. When she died, they found a small ring on her finger, the locket ring. When they opened it, they found two tiny portraits, one of herself and one of her mother, Anne Boleyn. Even at the very end, after all the wars, the lovers, and the crowns, she was still that 3-year-old girl looking for the mother she had lost. She had carried that secret grief, hidden under gold and jewels, for 66 years. Elizabeth I was the architect of her own loneliness, a woman who chose to be a symbol rather than a human. She saved her country, but she lost herself. She remains the Virgin Queen, not because she lacked passion, but because she possessed a passion for power that was so great it left no room for anything else. As she rests in the cold marble of Westminster Abbey, she finally has what she sought her entire life, a peace that no man can take away, and a silence that finally keeps her secrets safe. To truly grasp the magnitude of Elizabeth's isolation, we must step outside the royal apartments and into the streets of Elizabethan London, a city of radical contrasts that mirrored the Queen's own soul. While Elizabeth sat in chambers perfumed with rosewater and musk, just miles away, the sturdy beggars and the plague-ridden masses lived in a world of filth and desperation. Elizabeth's government was the first to implement the Poor Laws, a move that showed she understood the precarious nature of her subjects' lives.
She knew that a hungry population was a rebellious one. But this connection to her people was always filtered through a glass of royal theater. She was the mother of her people, yet she had no children. She was the nurse of the church, yet she privately wrestled with a religious skepticism born from seeing her father change faiths as easily as he changed wives. This duality, the public savior and the private doubter, created a psychological tension that defined the very air of her court. She was a woman who lived in the light of public adoration to escape the darkness of her own memories. If you are finding this exploration of history's shadows as gripping as I do, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We are journeying into the final chapters of this epic, looking at the symbols Elizabeth wore as armor and the legacy she left for the world that came after. Every jewel Elizabeth wore, every lace ruff that encircled her neck like a fan, was a piece of propaganda. In the portraits of her later years, you will often see a serpent embroidered on her sleeve or a rainbow held in her hand. These weren't just fashion choices, they were a secret language. The serpent represented wisdom, and the rainbow symbolized peace, specifically the peace she brought after the storm of the Armada. She used her clothing to communicate her divine right to rule at a time when many still believed a woman was incapable of logical thought. Her gowns were so stiff and heavy that they stood up on their own, creating a physical barrier between her and her courtiers. No one could get close to her, literally or figuratively. This armored fashion was her response to the hidden illness of vulnerability. If she could turn herself into a living statue of gold and silk, then perhaps she wouldn't feel the tremors in her hands or the ache in her heart. She became a prisoner of her own wardrobe, spending hours every morning being sewn into costumes that were designed to hide the fact that she was a mortal woman. Modern science suggests that Elizabeth's behavior in her final months, the staring, the silence, and the refusal to sit, was not just madness, but a deep-seated reaction to the lead poisoning we discussed earlier. Chronic lead exposure doesn't just damage the skin, it destroys the nervous system. It leads to a condition known as lead encephalopathy, which causes high levels of anxiety, cognitive decline, and a terrifying loss of motor control. This explains why she feared her bed. To a person suffering from the neurological effects of lead, the sensation of lying down can feel like falling into a void. Her standing for 15 hours wasn't just an act of will, it was a desperate attempt to stay grounded in a world that was literally spinning out of her control. She was dying from the very makeup she used to look immortal. It is a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. The queen who saved England was killed by her own vanity and the toxic beauty standards of her age.
As the sun set on the Tudor dynasty, the world stood at a crossroads. Elizabeth had spent 44 years holding back the tide of the future. She refused to name an heir because she knew that the moment she did, her own light would fade. Men used to worship the rising sun rather than the setting sun, she once said. She was a woman who understood the fickle nature of loyalty. By the time she finally signaled to her advisors that James of Scotland should succeed her, she was beyond speech. She had held on to the power until her very last breath, ensuring that no man could ever say he took the crown from her. She gave it up only when death itself forced her hand. The story of Elizabeth I is a story of what we lose when we win everything. She won the war against Spain, she won the war against her rivals, and she won the war for history's respect. But she lost the quiet moments of life. She never knew the comfort of a child's hand, the honesty of a friend who didn't want something from her, or the peace of a mind that wasn't constantly scanning for assassins. She was England's greatest queen and its most lonely woman.
As her funeral procession moved through the streets of London, the people wept as if they had lost their own mother. They knew that with her, a certain kind of magic was leaving the world. The Virgin Queen was gone, leaving behind a nation that was ready to face the world, even if she had never been ready to face herself. To truly understand the environment that molded Elizabeth's psyche, we have to look at the strange and often contradictory world of Elizabethan London, a place where the highest levels of intellectualism met the most brutal forms of entertainment. While the Queen was translating Greek philosophy in her private study, her subjects were flocking to the Southwark pits for bear baiting or to the Globe Theatre to see the latest blood-soaked tragedy. This was a society comfortable with cruelty, which makes Elizabeth's own internal struggles even more poignant. She lived in a world where physical pain was a constant, and yet her hidden illness was something she treated with a level of psychological sophistication that was centuries ahead of her time. She understood that power was a performance, but she also knew that the theater of the street was just as important as the theater of the court. If you are still with us on this journey into the heart of the Renaissance, please like this video and subscribe. We are entering the final, deepest layer of the Queen's secret life, the testimonies of the women who saw her when the mask was truly off. The true keepers of Elizabeth's secrets were not her ministers or her generals, but her ladies of the bedchamber. These women saw Elizabeth without the wig, without the lead paint, and without the stiff silk gowns. Fragments of their diaries and letters suggest a woman far more fragile than the Iron Queen history remembers. They write of nights spent pacing the corridors, of the Queen talking to herself in different languages, and of her sudden, inexplicable weeping. One account mentions that she would often keep a sword by her side, even while she slept, stabbing at the tapestries in her room if she heard a rustle, convinced that assassins were hiding behind the woven stories of ancient heroes. This wasn't just paranoia, it was the result of a lifetime spent being the target of every Catholic power in Europe. Her ladies were the ones who had to apply the toxic makeup to her sores, and they were the ones who saw the physical price of her virginity. They were sworn to a silence that most of them kept until their own deaths, creating a wall of feminine loyalty that protected the Queen's image better than any army could.
Even the laws of the land reflected Elizabeth's obsession with control and image. Did you know that in Elizabethan England, it was actually a crime to be unemployed? The vagrancy laws were so strict that if you were found wandering without a master, you could be branded with a V or even hanged. Elizabeth viewed idleness as the mother of conspiracy. She applied this same rigor to her own life. She was never idle. If she wasn't governing, she was hunting. If she wasn't hunting, she was dancing. If she wasn't dancing, she was praying. This relentless activity was another way to drown out the hidden illness of her own thoughts. By staying in constant motion, she didn't have to face the silence of her empty bed or the reality that she was the last of her line. Modern historians often debate whether Elizabeth's Virgin Queen persona was a stroke of genius or a tragic necessity. If she had married, England might have been dragged into the religious wars that were tearing France and Germany apart. By remaining single, she kept England English. She turned her own body into a fortress, and in doing so, she allowed her country to grow into a global power. But the cost was the total erasure of Elizabeth the woman. By the end, she had become a living icon, more a statue than a person. When she finally closed her eyes in 1603, it wasn't just a monarch who died, it was an entire way of being. She had proven that a woman could rule alone, but she had also proven that the throne is the loneliest place on earth. As we conclude this deep dive, we are left with the image of a woman who was both a victim and a victor. She survived the execution of her mother, the wrath of her father, the prison of her sister, and the navies of Spain.
She conquered everything except the one thing no one can escape, the passage of time and the decay of the mortal frame. Elizabeth I remains the greatest mystery of the British monarchy, a woman who wore 1,000 masks and left us wondering which one, if any, was her real face. She was the virgin, the mother, the warrior, and the scholar, but above all, she was a survivor. And perhaps that is the true hidden illness of Elizabeth, the sheer exhausting effort of surviving in a world that wanted her to fail. Thank you for staying with us through this epic journey into the life of the Virgin Queen. Her story reminds us that history isn't just about dates and battles, it's about the human heart and the secrets we keep to protect the things we love. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to check out our other videos on history's greatest mysteries. Until next time, keep looking beneath the surface. To bridge the gap to our final goal, we must look at the immediate aftermath of her passing, the moment the golden age met the cold reality of a new dynasty. The silence that fell over Richmond Palace on that March morning was deafening. For 44 years, England had known only one voice, one signature, and one face. As the royal messenger raced toward Scotland to deliver the news to James VI, he carried with him the sapphire ring Elizabeth had worn, a prearranged signal that the Tudor era was officially over. But the transition was far from smooth. The common people, who had prayed for good Queen Bess every Sunday, felt a sense of cosmic dread. They hadn't just lost a ruler, they had lost their protector, the only stable point in a world of religious chaos. The new king, James, was a stranger with a strange accent and a very different view of the world. He didn't understand the theater of the court or the delicate bond Elizabeth had nurtured with her subjects. Almost overnight, the cult of Elizabeth shifted from a living reality to a nostalgic dream.
If you are fascinated by how a single life can shift the course of an entire civilization, please hit that like button and subscribe. We are nearing the end of our 10,000-word journey, exploring the final echoes of Elizabeth's voice in the modern world. In the years following her death, the Virgin Queen underwent a secondary transformation. No longer a woman struggling with health and heartbreak, she became a national myth. During the reign of the Stuarts, when the country faced political unrest and civil war, people looked back at Elizabeth's reign as a lost paradise. This nostalgia is what fueled the legends we know today. The stories of her hidden illness were often used by later generations to explain why she was so unique, as if her greatness required some form of physical or psychological suffering to be believable. But modern science offers a different perspective. We now understand that Elizabeth was a pioneer in personal branding. Long before the age of social media, she understood that a leader's image is their most potent weapon. She lived her life in a glass house, and her illness was the weight of that constant visibility. Even today, in 2025, Elizabeth I continues to haunt our imagination. She has been portrayed by more actresses than almost any other historical figure, from Bette Davis to Cate Blanchett. Each generation finds something new in her. The 19th century saw her as a romantic, tragic figure. The 20th century saw her as a feminist icon. And today, we see her as a complex study in mental health, trauma, and the toxic nature of fame. We look at her lead-painted face and see the ancestors of our own filters and digital masks. Her struggle to balance a public career with a private soul is a struggle that resonates more than ever in our connected world. She was the first global celebrity, and she paid the celebrity price, a life where the real you eventually disappears behind the legend. As we reach the conclusion of this extensive narrative, we are left with a final, quiet thought. In the vault of Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth lies directly on top of her half-sister, Mary I. The two sisters who spent their lives at odds, representing two different Englands, are now joined in the silence of the stone. The inscription on their tomb reads, "Partners both in throne and grave, here we rest two sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, in the hope of one resurrection."
It is perhaps the only time Elizabeth was ever truly a partner with anyone. The loneliness that defined her life was finally broken by the one thing she couldn't outrun. The hidden illness of the Virgin Queen wasn't just lead poisoning or a thyroid condition or a childhood trauma, it was the crown itself. It was a heavy golden burden that demanded everything and gave back only immortality. Elizabeth Tudor accepted that trade. She gave us the Renaissance, the defeat of the Armada, and the foundation of the modern world. In return, she asked only that we remember her not as a broken woman, but as a queen who was married to her people. And 4 centuries later, we are still telling her story. We are still searching for the girl behind the white paint, the heart behind the silver breastplate, and the woman who chose to stand when the world told her to lie down.
Thank you for embarking on this 10,000-word journey with us. This has been an epic exploration of a life that changed everything. If you stayed until the very end, you are a true seeker of history's secrets. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who loves the mysteries of the past. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, the greatest stories are the ones that are never fully told.